Hello, and thank you for joining me for haunted houses and scary locations. Kindly step this way. There's no turning back now. To find a way out. I first saw the door that didn't exist when I was 6 years old. I wasn't scared of it then, of course, because what was there to be scared of? I didn't know it didn't exist, and this was Disneyland. And there's so much else for a kid to look at on the Haunted Mansion. If you've ever been on the ride, you'll know what part I'm talking about, where the zombie hand is coming out of the coffin right before your doom buggy goes to the hallway with the doors. It was cool when I was 6, and it's still a great part of the whole experience. Never too scary, this ride, which was perfect for me that first time. The door was across from the coffin, with 2 creepy pictures on each side. It was a perfectly normal door, but I know why I noticed it. It was painted bright yellow, pretty jarring in a dark and spooky haunted house. I nudged my brother, who was riding with me, but he looked at me funny and said, "Yeah, you do look like a ghost." No idea what that meant, but I shrugged it off, enjoyed the ride, and didn't ask him until afterwards. When I did, he told me I was crazy. There wasn't any bright yellow door there. There was just a dumb old mirror. I couldn't believe it at the time, but it wasn't important. And he was right, of course. It's just a dumb old mirror in between 2 creepy pictures. There's no yellow door in the Haunted Mansion. It was years later, when I was grown up and had kids of my own, that I went back to Disneyland. I was looking forward to it, to be honest, in part to convince myself I hadn't been going crazy. My wife and kids climbed into one doom buggy, but it wasn't big enough for everyone, so I just took the next one. I'd probably dreamed up the yellow door. What did I have to be so worried about? I saw it coming the moment the doom buggy rounded a corner, and I almost panicked. Okay, think rationally. Had they put one in at some point since the last time I rode this? Why did I remember it as a kid then? Of course, the doom buggy stopped right in front of the door. There was no other way for the universe to let me satisfy my curiosity. I heard the safety spiel, but I was already out of that thing and twisting the doorknob. I just had to know what was behind that door. I can't say I'm disappointed I found out either, though I do miss Jane and the kids. But it's not hard work, though you have to be very still until the doom buggies pass. And all the other residents here are very friendly. I'm number 1000, after all. Electromagnetic Fields and Sound Waves. I work at MIT in the field of electromagnetic fields and sound waves. It is a study into ghost sounds that really are not ghost sounds at all. The branch of science was created when a British physicist suggested that sound can be trapped in small pockets of varying electromagnetic fields. We have just had some luck in proving that. 3 weeks ago, we placed powerful electromagnets around a sound source and recorded a beeping sound inside it. It was Morse code for hello. And 4 nights ago, we confirmed the theory when the sound came out of the middle of the room while everything was turned off. The sound bubble had burst and returned the sound. We had proven the sounds in haunted places to be nothing more than sound bubbles, trapped by varying electromagnetic fields, just to burst and release the trapped sound waves. While we were ecstatic to prove a new theory, we still had more work to do, and I was placed on guard duty. I had to stay and wait to see if the sound would come again in a distortion echo. 5 minutes ago, the sound came back, but it was incomplete, just like a normal echo would be. But the missing part was at the end of the word, not at the beginning. The Morse code stopped after the second L. H-E-L-L. I was hoping that someone was pranking me, but a deep voice from the middle of the room just said,
"Is free."
I'm running away as fast as I can. The old mansion. I'm sure if you ask most people, they'll say they grew up on a street or neighborhood that had a house they thought was haunted, or a house they felt uneasy to walk past. But this is a tale of an actual haunted house. You know the kind I mean. There it sat, an old Victorian mansion at the end of Shadow Tree Lane, a decaying sign of the past, now surrounded by the modern world. The mansion was erected in 1914 by a wealthy doctor by the name of Thaddeus Burkholder. Since then, a total of 15 families have lived there, all suffering some sort of tragedy, but has since sat in rot and decay after the last family moved out in 1982. It is said that multiple spirits haunt the decrepit dwelling, from members of the families that once resided here to visitors that never left. Generations of children that have lived and grown up on Shadow Tree Lane knew never to play near the old mansion, no more so than the present-day group of neighborhood children. Ever since the disappearance of little Timmy Booth in 1992, parents and the children that grew up from that time to become parents have warned their children to never venture near the haunted mansion. It's become a neighborhood urban legend. Be careful. You don't want to end up like little Timmy, do you? The parents would ask, even sometimes threaten if their children would misbehave. Most children listened to the warning, but for the ones who didn't, their parents did everything in their power to make them understand that this was no joke, and this was no ploy to get them to behave. They explained there was actually a boy named Timmy Booth. He was 12 years old and was friends with every kid in the neighborhood. Everyone loved Timmy. One fall day in '92 was like any other. Laughter echoed throughout the neighborhood, children riding their bikes up and down the street, fathers mowing their lawns, and mothers tending to their gardens. Just a typical day in a typical neighborhood where nothing bad ever happens. Now there was always warnings and neighborhood talk of not to go around or near the mansion, even back then. Not as serious as now, but people that were smart knew not to mess around that funky old house. Now Timmy and his friends were smart, and they did know. But there was a new kid in the neighborhood. He and his family had just moved in 5 days prior to the incident. The new kid's name was Matthew, and sadly, for everyone else, He was a bully. At first, Matthew was kind, charming his way into the group with Timmy and his friends. On the day of the incident, the group of friends were playing football. They split into two teams. Timmy led one team, and Matthew led the other. Timmy played quarterback, and he and his team couldn't be stopped that day, scoring on every play. People say Matthew became more and more agitated as the game went on, and after the last touchdown, his team gave up. He ran over to a boy named Billy who had the ball and just pulled back and punched him. Matthew then picked up the football, got on his bike, and rode towards the mansion. Timmy and the rest of the group gave chase. When they caught up to Matthew, he was standing on the front lawn, smiling. Timmy was angry because Billy was his best friend, and Timmy didn't particularly care for kids that were bullies either. When Timmy got closer to Matthew, he backed up. Every time Timmy would take a step forward, Matthew would take two back, always smiling. You see, Matthew might have been new to the neighborhood, but he already heard all the tales and the warnings of the old house, and knew all the kids were scared to go near it. Timmy began to notice he was being sucked in further and further towards the house. Timmy stopped and said, "Give me the damn ball, Matt. And if you want to punch somebody, pick on somebody your own size. I'm right here." Matthew noticed Timmy had stopped, though. "Why'd you stop, Timmy? You scared of this house, aren't you? Here, you take this ball. Take it. Take it." Matthew turned and threw the ball towards the front porch. It hit the front door, and it slowly opened just a little. Everyone jumped back just a little. Matthew saw this and began to taunt the group. "What's the matter, guys? You afraid of an old house? What a bunch of babies. Hey, Tim, you afraid of some old wood? I thought you're supposed to be the tough guy here, the leader in this group. Shit, no wonder everyone is scared. Look at who's leading, just a coward who's afraid of an old house." Tim started defending his friends and became defiant. "Listen, you dumbass, no one is afraid," even though deep down he knew his friends were, and admittedly, he was a little afraid himself. "We're just tired of your bullshit, especially me." "Oh yeah? You're tired of my bullshit, and you're not afraid? Then prove it, tough guy. Go get that football, Tim. If you do, I'll leave you guys alone forever. But if you don't, I won't let any of you guys forget this day," Matthew said smugly as he looked at the entire group. Timmy knew never to go up to that house. He knew the tales and the warnings. Could hear his mother saying, "Don't ever go near that house, Timmy. Nothing good ever happens there. Promise me, Tim," playing over and over in his head. But Tim closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He didn't want to go, but this was his chance to get this bully off their backs. He slowly crept to the front porch, his friends giving him encouragement, some begging him not to go. He saw the ball just a few feet in front of him, right by the cracked open front door of the decrepit old mansion. He stepped on the first step, then the second. He reached the front door. Now most accounts from the kids that were there said that Tim turned back to the group and said, "Did you hear that? What's that sound?" They said it looked like he began to tremble. He reached down, and right when he grabbed the football, the front door swung all the way open, and he was pulled in. A few of the group rushed to the door to help Tim, while the others stood in shock and panic. Someone screamed, "Go get help!" and a few kids ran off. The children that stayed could hear Timmy's screams, culminating in the most blood-curdling scream, and the silence. His friends couldn't get the door open to save him. They pounded and kicked, but nothing worked. A couple of the kids' fathers showed up, and they tried everything to get it open, but couldn't. Finally, one of the fathers brought an axe, and they chopped the front door down. When they rushed in, they found Timmy hanging from the staircase. No cuts or injuries, but he was drained of blood, and all of his organs were splattered on the floor beneath him. Everyone was in shock. Nobody knows what or who did this to Timmy. There was no signs of anyone inside, and every window and door was boarded up. They never found out what did this to Timmy. The neighborhood was never the same after that day. Matthew and his family were harassed and blamed for what happened, and were forced to move away, never to be heard from again. So if you ever happen across the old mansion on Shadow Tree Lane, please keep on walking. Wife saw dead friend 90 days after he died. Back in 2010 and 2011, I met a World War II veteran who I became very good friends with. His wife passed away in 2012, and he didn't have much of anyone left, as he outlived his whole family. His parents were born in the early 1880s, and grandparents served in the Civil War. My mother often made dinners for him, and we became very close as we spent a lot of time together. He was like the father I didn't have, and I respected and loved him as if he was my father. Fast forward to May of 2021. He had a fall at the nursing home that he was at and broke his hip and a couple of ribs. He later fell again at the nursing home and broke his clavicle and 3 more ribs, just a few weeks after his first fall. Sadly, that was the beginning of the end. He stopped eating and drinking and died in mid-July. He always had a fascination of ghosts and told us a particular ghost story that took place in the 1950s. I remember I asked him to visit me if he could, and he said he would try. The last time I saw him, he said, "I love you," and passed away shortly after. I was thankful I was there, but I think he held on just long enough for me to leave, so I wouldn't have to see him pass away. He died 5 minutes after I left. Now, back to the 1950s ghost story. He used to live in Kansas City, Missouri, around 1953 to 1966, in a house that he thought was haunted. If they had guests over, the guests often felt a presence or had a lingering feeling that something wasn't right. They would sometimes see shadows and hear things too. The house was built on an old Native American graveyard, but the ghosts that haunted their house seemed to be very friendly. My friend always treated the ghosts like a member of their family, so that may be why the ghost was friendly. One day, in 1958, he went upstairs to go check something in the guest room and open the door. He got hit with a cold blast of air, and all of the curtains were completely horizontal towards the ceiling. He called his wife over, who also saw it. The curtains remained that way for about 5 minutes before they slowly rested on their own. He left us the house, and we kept it so that we could remember him and keep his legacy alive. I would have dreams about him occasionally, nice dreams too, and left me feeling calm and at peace. We would sometimes hear footsteps and doors close in the house, but didn't pay much attention to it. One day, I heard a crash in the master bedroom, and the curtains had fallen off of the wall somehow. I put them back up, but could not figure out how it could have came off of the wall. The scariest one was around 3 a.m. in the morning, mid-October. My wife and I were sleeping, and she heard a man talking. She couldn't quite make it out, but it sounded like he was telling a story of some sort, something he always liked to do. My wife thought it was me talking and turned around to see what I wanted. She realized I was asleep and saw a shadow man standing next to the window, right beside me, with a triangular-shaped hat and completely opaque. It even blocked out the light from the side of the window. She got scared and screamed and turned on the light. The figure was still there, but disappeared about 15 seconds later. I woke up and she said I stared right at it, but I didn't see anything. Could this have just been sleep paralysis? She was able to move and talk, but I couldn't see the figure. She's always been a little sensitive to some degree. There once was a haunted house that took its rest on a hill. It sat in silence during the chill of winter. It despised the blossom of spring, what with the season bringing forth the beauty and splendor of the earth, though the grass outside was dead. It creaked and groaned during the heat of the summer. It could feel itself sweating and warping to the brutality of the sun. But oh, did it love fall. The trees that it could see in the distance began to change their color. The homes and shops in town that it could see began to decorate their homes with spooky jack-o'-lanterns and fake skeletons. The children would run amok, off daring each other to approach the home. If only they would actually enter this year, the house thought to itself. The house loved the children like it loved the fall. It loved to see how the children would change color inside the home, how their hue would change and then run red, just like the trees. When they were still, the house liked to carve silly faces on the children, just like the jack-o'-lanterns it saw in the distance. When they were motionless, the house liked to hang them to twist and swing, just like the skeletons it saw far out on the houses. Oh, what a happy Halloween. Strange ghostly experience. This is a true story that I experienced as a child. I have absolutely no explanation for this encounter, other than a possible paranormal experience. If anyone has any possible explanation or similar experience, please feel free to comment. It was a Wednesday night. My dad was having his weekly game night with his friends. Throw darts, drinking beer, typical game night for my dad. And my mom and I went out to the garage, where his man cave was, to tell him good night. I remember telling my dad's cousin about the tooth I had lost, and that I was so excited for the tooth fairy to come. I was about 8 or 9 years old. I usually slept with my mom on these nights, since my dad didn't want to disturb us coming to bed after midnight. She tucked me into bed and read me a story. Afterward, I closed my eyes while my mom read her own book. The click of her lamp would always wake me up for some reason, and I stared into the pitch-black room. Only this time, I was met with a strange figure standing in the corner of the room, in between my mom's dresser and the door. It looked like a woman, and her head was looking over her right shoulder with her body facing forward. She did not have any features other than the outline of her body. She was solid green and was glowing without any light shining on her. I was frozen with fear. The longer I stared at it, it would float towards me. When I shut my eyes, out of fear, it would be right back in the same place it was before. When daylight came, it disappeared. Or so I thought. It was about a week later, and I had avoided that room like the plague, because I had an uneasy feeling every time I stepped into that room. I was eating lunch and watching cartoons on the TV in my parents' bedroom when I saw it out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't green this time, but it was clear in the daylight. It was shaped the same exact way and in the same exact spot. I was in a different spot in the room, and it floated towards me. The same thing happened when I stopped looking at it. It was in the same corner as before. A couple of months went by, and my great-grandmother had passed away. My dad inherited her dresser, and my parents decided to move it into the bedroom. After the dressers were switched, the figure never came back. My brother has the old dresser in his room and hasn't had any experiences like I did. I'm almost 23 now, and I've moved out of my parents' house. Their old bedroom has been transformed into a guest room that I stay in when I come home to visit. The uneasy feeling I used to have is gone, but I haven't seen anything since the figure disappeared years ago. I've told my mom about it, but of course she doesn't believe me and hasn't seen anything herself. I grew up in Russellville, Kentucky, which has a lot of history with the Civil War. My parents' house used to be a vet's office back in the 1800s, but I'm not sure what that has to do with a ghost. I still have zero explanation for what happened all those years ago. It never tried to hurt me. It would just move towards me multiple times a night. This Mountainside cemetery. This place is a peculiar one, not because it's the only cemetery we have in town, nor is it because it's on a mountain. It's because this place is very close to a fault line, and for every decade it seems to shift and cause a nasty quake whenever it happens. What you see here now doesn't do it justice. This place looks like an asymmetric crooked palace of tombs stacked on one another. The oldest tombs here are buried again by the other tombs that were put on top of them. Newer tombs are placed or forced to be on top of the mountain by their loved ones. They believe that it made them closer to God or something. But that's not to say that there aren't any tombs on the foot of the mountain. No, in fact there are many, most of them children. Some of them are no bigger than a box of shoes. People had complaints about the location of this cemetery. They find it difficult to navigate, and it's also exhausting to climb it, even if they only visit their departed once a year. It can't be helped. This town just doesn't have enough flatland to accommodate the dead. You know, my uncle used to be a groundskeeper here. Yeah, he was. And he told me great deals of stories. But none of them compare to what he had told me and my parents when he woke up in a hospital. Remember when I told you about the fault here? Yeah, it shifted one night when he was wondering about the cemetery. The land also gave, and the Jenga that was the tombs had collapsed under. And so was he. He told me how he woke up trapped under several open tombs. No lights, no nothing. My uncle isn't really one to be panicked on situations like that. He's been buried alive before. At least that's what he and my dad told me about. But this night had scarred him. He swore to people that when he was trapped, the half-rotten corpses that landed on him, they talked to him. My uncle had been dead about 2 decades now, but the memory of that night haunted him for years. Now I know this might sound insensitive, but we were glad he had dementia. He forgot about that night and died in his sleep in a home. Anyway, didn't mean to bore you, just offering a distraction. I'm sure the rescuers will find you in no time. Ghost Town, Altona. Another bright idea of mine. Let's get a group of people and head out to find a local ghost town known as Altona. To my surprise, there were 4 of us that headed out that night. We piled into my mom's Cavalier that I borrowed and set out from Oshawa, Ontario, to head towards Uxbridge, where the Altona ghost town was located. We were not able to find proper directions on how to get there, as the city had started to build up around the old town. We eventually decided to just stop and ask someone for directions. There has to be someone who knows how to get there. It seriously felt like something out of the movie Silent Hill. The young gentleman working at the coffee shop knew exactly how to get there. He had told us that he had only been there once himself, but that he would never go back. We asked him what happened, but he just replied with, "I'm not going to ruin your experience. All I will say is that I will never go back." Chills, right? Well, this only perked our curiosity, and sure enough, off we went. I can recall we had to cross a bridge before taking a sharp left turn. This led us to a Mennonite church. We quickly got out of the car and made our way inside. Searching around the church, we really didn't find anything interesting. But when we went to walk around the outside of the church, there was a cemetery that went around the property. All of us were sure that someone was hiding in the bushes, keeping watch on us. This trip got weird way too fast. As we were attempting to drive down an old driveway to reach an abandoned house, the car instantly began to overheat. We had no choice but to turn the car off and sit and wait for the car to cool down. About 10 minutes later, we started the car and backed up out of the driveway and continued to drive further into the town. This is when we noticed the car was surrounded by fog. The fog was so thick, it seemed like the windshield wipers would wipe it away, as if paint were on the windows. The road, which we were traveling down, led us across a set of train tracks. You had no choice but to slow down almost to a stop in order to cross the tracks without ruining your vehicle. Just off to the side of the tracks were about 50 old train cars that were not in use anymore. I quickly renamed that spot as the train graveyard. We made it over the tracks and continued down the road. Any time a vehicle would come up behind us, they would end up passing us quite quickly. This was confusing, as we could barely see 5 feet in front of us. It was like we were the only car surrounded by the fog. We ended up passing a GO station, which looked like a headquarters site. The building was far back from the road and had a huge fence around the perimeter. Other than this building being in the middle of nowhere, there was nothing out of the ordinary about it. We continued up the same road for about 30 minutes before we decided it was time to turn around. The ghost town only went so far, and if we continued to drive any further, we would just end up in the next town over. We turned the car around and headed back the way we came. Cars are just passing us at high speed, regardless of the fog that was making it so hard for us to see. Then nothing, just us, surrounded by fog, driving down this long-ass road. We came to the set of train tracks again, but as we were crossing them, I noticed that the train graveyard was on the same side of the road as it was the first time we passed by. We then passed the GO station building. We should have passed this first, before the train tracks, if we were retracing our way. Confused, we turned the car around again. Now for sure, we are going the right way to get out of here. Soon enough, we crossed the train tracks again, then the GO station. What the hell is going on? We had our cell phones out, which kept redirecting our directions, and wouldn't you know it, we were running out of gas. We eventually went to the GO station building and waited outside their fence for someone to notice us. To our luck, there was someone getting ready to leave this facility. We were literally standing in front of his car before he could stop to see if we needed help. We told what happened, and he just started to laugh. He said people get turned around out there all the time. It was one road. You either go north or south. How can so many people get turned around? After speaking with this man, we rushed back to the car and turned the car around and followed the same way the man had just went. This time, the road did not cross the train tracks, and we were able to make it out safely back to town. On our way, driving through Ajax, Ontario, we came to a road called Altona Road. Altona was the name of the ghost town we had just came from. When we approached the intersection, the streetlights began to flicker wildly, as if Altona was giving us a final scare. Just like the gentleman at the coffee shop, I went there one time, and I will never go back there again. It was like we were trapped in a different dimension and couldn't escape. The last thing that made this whole experience creepy was the time everything happened at. We arrived at the Mennonite church around 1 a.m. By the time we were able to leave the ghost town, it was getting close to 4 a.m.